I'm James Howison, and I'm on the faculty of the School of Information here at the University of Texas at Austin. My background is in both politics and economics, so quite far afield from information studies. I did my undergrad at the University of Sydney in Australia, and at the time I ended up doing an undergraduate dissertation on the political economy of the internet. Typically well-scoped, narrow undergraduate dissertation. Of course, that was in 1998 when the internet was relatively small. And from there, I worked with refugees in Thailand for a while, and then I worked doing telecom policy advice in Los Angeles, and for a while I worked as a management consultant back in Sydney as well. From there, I moved to the States to do my PhD, actually at the Information School at Syracuse University. Quite a long move from Sydney to Syracuse, but both in distance and in climate. But a place that I found the information field and thrived within it. When I started my dissertation, I wanted to study something about the connection between what I saw in open source software development, which at the time I thought was people who were building software out of love, and the non-profit world that I'd seen working with refugees in Thailand and in other places, where organizations needed a lot of help with technology and software. As these things go, doctoral dissertations get chopped down and chopped down and chopped down until you find a researchable question, and so I ended up studying just the open source side of things. So that was my path to the field of information studies. I had great interest in political economy and theories like Marxist economics and feminist economics, but around me I saw the role that technology was playing in changing the world, the economy, the way we interact socially. And whenever I talked to economists about this, their eyes just kind of glazed over a little bit. They were never interested in understanding the deep technology aspects. By deep technology, I just mean something like internet addressing systems. Crucial to how the networks work, and valuable properties like domain names. And these things were just a step too far for traditional economists to really dive into. But in the information studies field, I found that people were willing to get down deep in the technology in order to emerge the social, economic, and political implications. And that's why that became an intellectual home for me. So my focus in the field is on new technologies making possible new ways of working, particularly ways of working together. So we think about new technologies, and that might be something like a chat client, or it might be something like a version control system, or it might be something like the network. And we think of these new technologies, and they do facilitate new ways of working, but the way they do it is never simple. And so I study two particular types of work. I've studied open source software development, and more recently I've been studying scientists that build software. And I study these two things for slightly different reasons. I study open source software development because it's unexpectedly successful, and I've been studying scientists building software because it's unexpectedly difficult. And so I like to look for situations where the outcomes are other than we'd expect, either from theory or from practical experience, and dive in to understand what's going on with that. So my research on open source software has focused on trying to understand what people call the open source way. And you might hear this when someone says, oh, we're doing this like open source. And they usually mean we're doing this in an open, unstructured way that allows people to show up and contribute and work. With my doctoral advisor, Kevin Krauston, I investigated open source software development, and I really focused in on how the motivations were affecting the way people work. And so what I found was a situation where people were really driven by the use value of the software. That was leading to software development that was unfolding in very small layers that layer on top of each other. And so rather than sitting down and planning out a big plan of work, the developers were tackling things that were of immediate interest to them, of immediate value, and that they thought they could get done in a relatively short period of time. What's fascinating about this is that we end up with really complex pieces of software through very small, almost always individual coding tasks, which means that rather than sitting down and planning it all out and identifying the ways my software is going to work with somebody else's software, people are able to get that work done. What's been interesting in the scientific context is asking why is that difficult to replicate? And what we found in science is lots of stops and starts, that the incentive structure in science is very, very different. So rather than being driven by immediate needs, the software work is driven by people's scientific agendas. And those play out over years and are closely tied into publications. And that means two things. It means that people have to turn their reputation into publications in order to justify the time they spend on software. And it means you have much longer cycles. And by the time the code is good and working for their piece, it's often diverged a lot from the code it was based on and is much harder to push back in and form a basis for other people's work. And so what we see in the open space is that technology has facilitated people being able to share and build on each other's work, but of course it plays out differently depending on the incentive structures and other social aspects. And so what I love about these questions is they combine really getting down deep into how software is built and works, and drawing on social and economic theories to understand that intersection. And while other fields definitely grapple more with technology than they did when I was starting out as an academic, I still think the information field has that ability to value both of those equally and to be surrounded by people who are really diving into the technical questions and people whose specialty is in the social, legal, or even historical questions. So if I were to describe my field of work, I say that I study information work. And I say that to build bridges with other people who are also studying people working with information. Often that means people who are working in traditional information organizations, organizing, managing, curating, preserving information. But it can also mean people who are using information to build things, digital things. And so the products that they're building, like software or perhaps graphic art or even a book like Wikipedia, are represented digitally. And that's a shift that's crucial, not only because we can distribute that work, but also because it means that we have to be able to manage versions and that we can build artifacts and objects out of small sets of changes that we can share with each other. And so we're here at the Information School at the University of Texas. We have the Information Work Research Group, which brings together scholars who are studying in those areas. Studying information work is important because it is spread throughout the economy and society and culture. Increasingly, everyone's job is dealing with digital things. And in fact, I always like to make an argument that the area I study is important, but I like to be in a school where I think the areas that other people are studying are important as well. I'm going to talk about two of the courses that I have developed and love to teach here. The first one is a course on online communities, and this draws on my research background, but also brings students forward to help them succeed in what's an emerging profession, which is the management or facilitation or energization of online communities. So many organizations want to connect with their members and community online. It's easy to set up a forum or an environment and hope people show up. It's more interesting and a little harder to be the person that's charged with driving energy and excitement in those communities, inviting new people in, planning activities, and creating the energy that then is picked up by the community and driven into organic activity. So in that class, we look at things like, how do I set the stage for an online community? What sort of activities can I do in the early days that will drive activity, make it seem like a vibrant, alive place? And how do I track that others are coming in and taking up those roles, as well as do things like manage moderation and deal with conflict in online communities, because not everyone is there to have a great time. So that class also allows me to teach about online communities. So we talk about managing a wiki, we talk about managing a YouTube channel, or what does a moderator in a subreddit do? And those investigations of technology allow students to come out with some of the social theories of belonging and motivation, some of the economic theories of voluntary participation versus paid participation, but also experience in the technologies so that they can go into organizations, roll them out, and drive forward those communities. Another course I teach is called Data Wrangling, which I developed here. That course is a from-scratch introduction to technologies where I really focus on technologies that let you take data sets like an Excel sheet or a web page, bring them down, manipulate them, break them down, build them back up again, store them in a database, pull it out and do an analysis. And this was really driven by the research work we were doing looking at information work and talking about how a broad swath of professions really need those skills. The course is designed for people who've never programmed before or perhaps never worked with data before, which has been a really interesting intellectual exercise because so much programming education does wonderful things like say, well, this is obvious, or, I'm teaching you Python, so it's like this, but it's like that in C. And that's the sort of explanation that works perhaps for people who've done a little bit of programming before. It makes sense to the person teaching because they're building analogies, but in that course I don't do any of that. And I make sure that I'm building an environment which is welcoming to people that are just starting to think about that topic, but also drives all the way through from data models, which we start building with paper and strings, which sounds hokey, but is a great exercise that I refer to all the way through the semester. Then we learn SQL, and then we start again from scratch with Python, and we start by saying, a program works from the top to the bottom, and then we learn about if statements, we learn about loops, we learn about how to think about code, which is an area where I'm really trying to build more into my teaching, how to break down programming so that it makes sense to a wider group of people. And in the end, the students have been out collecting data in the world, pulling it together, breaking it down with Python, for example, learning how to split fields apart or use regular expressions to parse things. And in the end, they come up with an analysis. It might be as simple as a count, it might be a set of visualizations, and in the process, they also teach themselves a new tool.